I, like many of you, am old enough to remember a time when one gaffe, one mistake by a political candidate would spell the end of his or her candidacy. Think Howard Dean's weird yell after winning a primary, or Gary Hart's dropping out of a presidential race because it was discovered that he'd had an extramarital affair. Oh my. It's no secret that those days are gone, now that we have a president who's fathered 5 kids with 3 women, the latter 2 of whom were both relationships started by extramarital affairs, and who makes controversial statements daily with 0 repercussions. But today's deep dive is about a story that reminds us that every step we take away from those halcyon days where politicians were held to what some considered too high a standard is a step towards something else. And how far can we go before it's too late? There is the brink of insanity, and then there is the abyss. Hello, and welcome back to Your Neighbor on the Left, the podcast where we talk about liberal politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. As always, my name is Don Spielis, and I am your host. Today, we're going to be talking about the young candidate for governor of California, a man by the name of Kyle Langford, a construction worker cum right-wing social media darling whose blatant anti-Semitism and misogyny are turning heads. But as with most things these days, not all of the people who should be reacting to it are in fact reacting. But first, let's look at some hot topics. There was a remarkable and somewhat unsettling moment in American politics this past week. A public clash between President Donald Trump and Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell during a rare presidential visit to the Fed's headquarters in Washington, D.C. The scene was extraordinary, not just for its rarity, but for what unfolded. Powell, in real time, fact-checking Trump's claims about the cost of the Fed's ongoing renovation project, a $2.5 billion endeavor that Trump tried to inflate to $3.1 billion. This wasn't just a disagreement over numbers, it was a public rebuke of a president by a central banker, a moment that exposed Trump's pressure campaign against the independent Federal Reserve and its chair. But even more striking is how right-wing social media has spun this encounter, claiming Trump caught Powell in a lie, a narrative that flips reality on its head. So let's unpack what happened, why it matters, and how this distortion reflects a broader strategy to undermine truth for political gain. As with so much that goes on these days, this is a story of power, accountability, and the battle for control of the narrative. The Federal Reserve, the institution that sets U.S. monetary policy, is designed to be independent, insulated from political pressure to ensure decisions like interest rate adjustments serve the economy, not partisan agendas. But President Donald Trump has made no secret of his desire to influence the Fed, particularly targeting Chair Jerome Powell, who he nominated in 2017, but has since forgotten that temporarily, and has also taken to calling Powell a moron, a numbskull, and a disaster. Trump's primary grievance? Powell's refusal to slash interest rates, which Trump argues would boost the economy and housing markets. Posts on X and news reports show Trump repeatedly demanding rate cuts of up to 3 percentage points, accusing Powell of choking the economy by keeping rates steady at 4.25% to 4.5%. This tension came to a head during Trump's visit to the Fed headquarters on July 24th, ostensibly to inspect the $2.5 billion renovation of two historic buildings, the Mariner S. Eccles Building and the 1951 Constitution Avenue Building. The project, approved in 2017 and ongoing since 2022, has faced cost overruns, rising from $1.9 billion to $2.5 billion due to asbestos removal, security upgrades, and industry-wide rising construction costs. Trump and his allies, including OMB Director Russell Vought and FHFA Director Bill Polt, have seized on these overruns, alleging mismanagement or even fraud by Powell as a pretext to pressure him to resign or just firing him. The visit was no routine tour. Accompanied by Republican Senators Tim Scott and Thom Tillis, White House officials James Blair and Will Scharf, and others, all donning white hard hats, Trump used the occasion to escalate his campaign against Powell. It was the first presidential visit to the Fed since 2006, underscoring its political weight. But what unfolded before the news cameras was a moment few could have predicted. So picture the scene. Trump and Powell side by side in hard hats, standing amid construction equipment at the Fed's headquarters. Trump, waving a document, turns to reporters and claims the renovation's cost has ballooned to about $3.1 billion. It went up a little bit, or a lot, he said. He doubles down, saying the cost jumped from $2.7 billion to $3.1 billion, implying Powell's mismanagement. But Powell, visibly skeptical, shakes his head and interjects, "I'm not aware of that." Trump, undeterred, hands Powell the paper, claiming the figures just came out. Powell scans the document for a moment and delivers a calm but firm correction. "You just added in a third building." "It's a building that's being built," Trump insists. "No," says Powell. "It was built 5 years ago." Powell retorts, noting that Trump's figure includes the William McChesney Martin building, renovated and reopened in 2021. "It's not new," Powell says, shutting down Trump's attempt to inflate the cost by $600 million. The exchange, captured on video, is awkward but revealing. Powell, the reserved central banker, publicly correcting the President of the United States in real time and not hiding his feelings, well, at all, via his facial expressions. Now, this wasn't just a math error. Posts on X highlight the moment's significance, with one user noting, "That was Jerome Powell fact-checking the president live on national TV and exposing that Trump added $600 million to the renovation costs by mistake or on purpose." End quote. Another called it wild, emphasizing Powell's quick thinking in debunking Trump's claim. The Fed's own budget confirms the project's cost at $2.5 billion, with increases attributed to unforeseen issues, not fraud or lavish extras as Trump allies have claimed. Powell's pushback was rare. The Fed chair has largely avoided responding to Trump's taunts, focusing instead on inflation and economic stability. But this moment showed Powell's refusing to let misinformation stand, even in the face of a president known for dominating and altering narratives. Now, you'd think a clear fact check like this would settle the matter, but right-wing social media tells a different story. On platforms like X and Truth Social and Threads, Trump supporters and aligned influencers have spun the exchange to claim Trump exposed Powell as incompetent and dishonest. One X post from July 25th asserts that Trump's document, quote, "caught Powell off guard," end quote, framing it as a great takedown by the president. Others share selectively edited video clips that omit Powell's correction, amplifying the narrative that Trump revealed mismanagement at the Fed. This spin, as one X-user noted, is designed to distract from other controversies like Trump's handling of Jeffrey Epstein-related files. This distortion is not accidental. It's part of a broader strategy by Trump and his allies to undermine Powell's credibility and pressure the Fed into lowering interest rates. By inflating the renovation costs and alleging fraud, Trump's camp paints Powell as unfit, even suggesting the overruns could be grounds for firing him, a move legal scholars say would be dubious, as Fed chairs can only be removed for, quote, cause, end quote, like criminal activity, not policy disagreements or construction disputes. Right-wing media has leaned into this narrative with figures like OMB Director Russell Vought accusing Powell of grossly mismanaging the Fed and lying to Congress about the renovations. Representative Anna Paulina Luna even called for a DOJ investigation into Powell for perjury, a claim dismissed as a long shot by analysts. These attacks aim to create a perception of scandal. Despite the Fed's transparency, Powell ordered an inspector general review of the project, and a public FAQ page debunks claims of, quote, VIP dining rooms or luxurious extras. The spin also serves as a distraction. As ex-posts and news reports note, Trump's focus on the Fed renovations coincided with efforts to deflect attention from controversies like the Epstein files. By framing himself as a construction-savvy outsider exposing waste, Trump rallies his base while step-citing accountability. But the facts, well, Powell's real-time correction and the Fed's documented budget undermine that narrative. Now, of course, this clash is not just about $600 million. It's about the integrity of the Federal Reserve's independence and the dangers of political interference in economic policy. Trump's pressure campaign, through public attacks, threats of firing, and now this renovation dispute, threatens the Fed's ability to make data-driven decisions free from partisan agendas. Lowering interest rates prematurely, as Trump demands, could fuel inflation, especially with his proposed tariffs looming. The Fed's caution, as Powell has stated, is about monitoring these risks, not playing politics. The right-wing spins also reveal a deeper issue, the weaponization of misinformation. By flipping the narratives to claim Trump caught Powell, his supporters exploit social media echo chambers to distort reality. This tactic erodes public trust in institutions like the Fed, which relies on credibility to maintain global investor confidence. As one analyst warned, a weakened Fed could trigger market volatility or even economic calamity if Trump were to attempt firing Powell, a move he's backed away from but hasn't totally ruled out. So yeah, this is a wake-up call. Misinformation spreads fast, especially when amplified by selective edits and loyalist media. The truth, Powell's correction, backed by the Fed's budget, matters, but it's drowning in a sea of spin. This moment reminds us to question narratives, check primary sources, and hold leaders accountable, whether they're in the White House or on X. Now, this is a topic that I think it's possible a lot of you haven't heard about because I don't think it got a lot of coverage. But I want to talk about a crisis that threatens America's leadership in space. NASA's historic workforce exodus. On July 26th, reports confirmed that nearly 20% of NASA's workforce, that's around 3,870 employees, have opted to leave the agency through voluntary resignation programs, driven by budget cuts and a broader push to shrink the federal government under the Trump administration. This isn't just a staffing issue. It's a potential death knell for missions like Artemis, Mars exploration, and the scientific discoveries that have defined NASA's legacy. So let's start with the numbers. NASA, an agency with just under 18,000 civil servants, is losing approximately 3,870 employees through a voluntary resignation program, with 870 opting out in the first round and 3,000 more in a second round that closed on July 25th. Add in normal attrition of about 500 employees, and NASA's workforce is shrinking to around 14,000. That's the lowest since the early 60s, before the Apollo program's peak. These figures come from NASA's own statements and reports from outlets like CBS News and Politico. So who's leaving? Over 2,145 of these are senior staff in GS-13 to GS-15 roles, including 875 top-level GS-15 employees. Think scientists, engineers, and managers who run NASA's core missions in science and human spaceflight. The Goddard Space Flight Center, which handles space probes and telescopes like Hubble, is losing over 800 staff, the highest of any center. Johnson Space Center, home to human spaceflight, is losing 366, Kennedy Space Center 311, and NASA headquarters 307. Even smaller centers like Glenn and Langley are shedding hundreds each. This exodus is part of the Trump administration's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, initiative, led until recently by Elon Musk, aimed at slashing federal jobs. NASA's program offered early retirements, buyouts, and deferred resignations, where employees stay on payroll until September 25 or later without working. But the scale of departures, 20% of the workforce, has stunned experts. Casey Dreyer of the Planetary Society called it a significant threat to NASA's scientific endeavors, warning of a brain drain that could cripple projects like the Artemis lunar mission set for 2027 and the Mars sample return. Why are so many leaving? Well, employees cite fear of deeper budget cuts, potentially 24 to 25% next year, slashing NASA's funding from $24 billion to $18 billion, and a lack of Senate-confirmed administrator. One departing staffer, quoted anonymously in Politico, said, quote, "Things just sound like it's going to get worse," end quote. This isn't just about jobs, it's about losing irreplaceable expertise. So, why should you care about NASA losing 3,800 plus employees? Because this isn't just a bureaucratic reshuffle. It's a direct threat to America's space ambitions and global standing. NASA's missions, from landing astronauts on the moon to studying Earth's climate, rely on specialized knowledge. Losing 2,145 senior staff means losing decades of experience in rocket design, telescope engineering, and mission planning. A letter signed by 360 current and former NASA employees, dubbed, quote, "the Voyager Declaration," end quote, warned that these cuts could compromise human safety, weaken national security, and undermine the core NASA mission. Take the Artemis program, aiming to return humans to the moon by 2027. The Johnson Space Center, central to this effort, is losing 366 staff, nearly meeting the White House's target of 419. The Goddard Space Flight Center, facing a proposed 50% cut to NASA's science budget, could see dozens of missions, like the James Webb Telescope's operations, delayed or canceled. The Mars sample return, a top priority for planetary science, is already at risk after budget uncertainties led to layoffs at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory last year. Experts, like Dr. Erica Gonzalez from the American Enterprise Institute, argue that this brain drain could lead to cost overruns and project delays, as new staff lack the mentorship of veterans. Former NASA Deputy Administrator Lori Garver called the cuts short-sighted, warning of ripple effects on morale and the aerospace industry. The U.S. risks ceding space leadership to competitors like China, whose space program is ramping up. An ex-post from July 13th framed it starkly. Quote, "Trump's admin's degrowth agenda is attempting to dismantle the backbone of U.S. scientific and R&D capacity, end quote. Then there's the issue of safety. NASA employees, referencing past disasters like Challenger, warned in their letter that losing experienced staff could jeopardize mission safety. The stakes couldn't be higher. Space exploration is unforgiving, and expertise is the difference between success and catastrophe. The public and political response to NASA's exodus has been intense. On X, sentiment ranges from alarm to resignation. Insiders warn it risks safety and mission delays as NASA gears up for Moon and Mars missions. Another user suggested NASA will need SpaceX even more, hinting at a shift towards private contractors like Elon Musk's company. This aligns with concerns from Florida State Rep. Anna Eskamani, who told USA Today that the cuts seem designed to funnel work to private firms, raising questions about NASA's independent oversight. Politically, there's pushback. Congressional Democrats, led by Representative Valerie Fauci, wrote to interim NASA Administrator Sean Duffy, calling the cuts flatly illegal until Congress approves the 2026 budget. They argue the White House's 24 to 47% budget reductions, slashing science funding by nearly half, defy congressional intent. Bipartisan support exists to restore NASA's funding to $25 billion, with Senate bills advancing this goal. But the administration's DOGE initiative presses on, with some seeing it as a deliberate move to privatize space exploration. The absence of a confirmed NASA administrator adds fuel to the fire. Trump's nominee, Jared Isaacman, was pulled in May 25 before a Senate vote, leaving the agency in limbo. Employees feel directionless, with one telling Politico, quote, "The lack of Senate-approved administrator is a factor," end quote. This leadership vacuum, combined with budget uncertainty, has crushed morale, driving even more departures. NASA's workforce exodus is a crisis, but it's not inevitable. Congress can reject the proposed cuts, and public pressure can make a difference. So here's how you can act. First, contact your representatives, especially those on the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee or the Senate Commerce Committee. Urge them to restore NASA's $25 billion budget and prioritize science and safety. Use sites like congress.gov to find out their contact info. Secondly, amplify the issue. Share credible reports from sources like NASA Watch or the Planetary Society on X or other social media platforms, countering narratives that downplay the crisis. Highlight stories like the Voyager Declaration to show the human cost. Third, support advocacy groups. The Planetary Society, led by Bill Nye, is fighting to save NASA's science programs. Donate or join their campaigns at planetary.org. Finally, visit a NASA center. Kennedy Space Center in Florida or Goddard in Maryland offer public tours. See the work firsthand. Talk to staff. Share their stories. NASA's future depends on public support, and your voice matters. So in today's deep dive, I want to discuss a story that is not just unsettling, but should be a clarion call to our collective conscience. Kyle Langford, a Republican candidate for California governor in the 2026 election, has thrust himself into the national spotlight with a single horrifying thing. A social media post featuring a photoshopped image of himself standing before the gates of Auschwitz. Yes, the Nazi concentration camp, where over 1 million people were systematically murdered during the Holocaust. His caption on this shot, quote, "My 0% unemployment plan," end quote. Now, this was not a mistake. It was not a gaffe. It was a deliberate, grotesque trivialization of one of humanity's darkest chapters. A calculated provocation that demands we ask, who is Kyle Langford? How did a construction manager from San Jose insinuate himself as a candidate for one of the most powerful governorships in the United States? What drives his ideology, his affiliations, and his campaign? And what does his rise reveal about the state of American politics? So let's unravel Langford's biography, his ascent to candidacy, his political positions, his ties to Donald Trump, and the string of controversies that have defined his campaign. We'll explore his chances of securing the Republican nomination in a state that hasn't elected a GOP governor in 2 decades. And we'll confront the broader implications of his rhetoric in a nation grappling with division and extremism. This is a story of moral failure, political ambition, and the urgent need for accountability. So who is Kyle Langford? Langford is an unlikely figure in California's political landscape. Born in San Jose, California, he spent at least part of his upbringing in Oregon, where he graduated from Lake Oswego High School. Notably, his educational journey appears to have ended there. No college degree, no advanced training is listed in any public records. This lack of higher education sets him apart from many gubernatorial candidates who often boast academic credentials or extensive public service records. Instead, Langford's carved out a career in construction management, an honorable field to be sure, but one that lacks the traditional polish and experience usually needed for political office. Now, he also serves as the executive director of the California First Political Action Committee, or California First PAC, a role that could suggest some organizational savvy and access to fundraising networks. The PAC, aligned with his campaign's California First slogan, focuses on promoting state sovereignty and conservative values. To say Langford's resume is thin on governance experience is a grand understatement, raising a critical question. How does a relatively unknown figure with no political track record position himself as a contender for California's highest office? To answer that, we need to explore his political philosophy and the path that led him to declare his candidacy. Now, California's gubernatorial election system is unique. Unlike many states, California uses a nonpartisan top 2 primary, where all candidates, regardless of party, compete in a single primary election on June 2nd, 2026. The top 2 vote-getters advance to the general election on November 3rd. This system allows anyone to declare candidacy without needing formal party endorsement, a low barrier that has enabled Langford's entry into the race. Langford announced his candidacy early in 2025, leveraging his role at California First PAC to build a platform. His campaign launched with a website and social media presence emphasizing a California First agenda rooted in what he calls Christian eco-nationalism. Posts on X from February 2025 show him actively promoting his campaign, with one declaring, quote, "The 41st governor of California will be Kyle Langford, actually," end quote, accompanied by a confident tone and emojis of a bear, a cross, and an American flag. His entry into the race was fueled by a broader wave of populist conservatism, inspired by figures like Donald Trump. Langford's lack of political experience somewhat mirrors Trump's 2016 outsider appeal, positioning him as a disruptor against Sacramento's establishment. The California First PAC, which he leads, announced a slate for the 2026 elections, suggesting he has some organizational backing, though its influence remains limited compared to mainstream Republican groups. But becoming a candidate is one thing. Securing the Republican nomination is quite another. In California's blanket primary, party nominations are less formal as the top 2 candidates advance, regardless of party. However, to be seen as the leading Republican, Langford must outshine competitors like Riverside County Sheriff Chad Bianco, business consultant Sharifa Hardy, marketing agency founder Brandon Jones, and Zaki Farms Vice President Leo Zaki. Polls from July 2025 give Langford just 2% support, trailing the other Republicans like Lanny Chen at 10%. His chances of emerging as the top Republican are slim given California's Democratic dominance and the GOP's failure to win statewide office since 2006. Social media sentiment, particularly on Reddit, underscores his marginal status. One user described him as politically irrelevant, noting that the California Republican Party is unlikely to fund his campaign or even to view him as a serious contender. Yet Langford's strategy doesn't seem to rely on mainstream GOP support. Instead, he's betting on viral attention and grassroots enthusiasm from a niche far-right base, a tactic we'll explore further when we discuss his controversies. Now, at the heart of Langford's campaign is his self-described ideology of Christian eco-nationalism, a term that blends religious conservatism, environmental concerns, and a fierce emphasis on state sovereignty. On his campaign website, he frames California's challenges, homelessness, crime, economic stagnation, as the result of weak leadership, ethical decay, and systematic failures in infrastructure, energy, and public safety. His rhetoric is bold, promising to restore California's greatness through decisive action. So let's unpack his key positions, starting with California-specific issues and then broadening to national concerns. So first up, law and order. Langford advocates for zero-tolerance crime policies, including modernizing police with artificial intelligence and using prison labor to rebuild California's infrastructure, such as roads and bridges. He argues this will enhance public safety and address the state's crumbling physical systems. Critics, however, warn that prison labor evokes forced labor camps, raising ethical red flags. As far as economic revitalization goes, his California First economic plan emphasizes energy independence through a mix of oil production, modular nuclear reactors, renewables, and battery storage. He also pushes for deregulation to keep businesses in California and proposes, quote, state work contracts to guarantee jobs and housing for those who are willing to do work. These ideas resonate with voters, particularly ones frustrated by California's high cost of living, but they lack detailed implementation plans and raise concerns about environmental impacts, especially his support for fossil fuels. Education and housing. Langford calls for cutting bureaucratic red tape to incentivize housing development and tackle homelessness, noting that California has the nation's highest housing costs. In education, he wants to empower parents, expanding school choice and refocusing schools on academics rather than politics. Now, these align with conservative priorities, but offer little clarity on addressing systemic issues like teacher shortages or affordable housing deficits. And then there's state sovereignty and immigration. Langford's most extreme stance is on immigration. He supports building a southern border wall and deporting all male undocumented immigrants. In a shocking proposal made on The Lily Show in April 2025, he suggested giving undocumented women 1 year to marry American men, specifically incels, to avoid deportation. He framed this as a way to, quote, encourage family formation, end quote, but it drew widespread condemnation for its misogyny and dehumanization of immigrants. The Libertarian Party of Idaho called it a moderate position within far-right circles, highlighting the extremism of his base. And as far as wildfire prevention and technology, Langford proposes using Starlink satellites for real-time wildfire detection and rapid response aircraft to combat blazes. He also advocates aggressive forest management, such as clearing dead timber. While on the surface, these ideas might seem innovative, but again, all of these plans lack cost estimates or feasibility studies. He's telling us what he wants to do, but not how he plans to do it. Now, on national issues, Langford aligns with conservative priorities rooted in his Catholic faith. He supports traditional values and has endorsed using lethal force against protesters, a stance he tied to working with Donald Trump. His focus on technology, AI policing, Starlink for wildfires, suggests an attempt to modernize conservative governance, but his proposals often lack substance, relying on buzzwords over actionable plans. What it boils down to is Langford's platform is a mix of populist promises and extreme rhetoric, appealing to a small but vocal segment of California's electorate. But it's his connection to Trump and the MAGA movement that amplifies his visibility, not to mention his controversies. Kyle Langford's campaign cannot be understood without examining his ties to President Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. In June 2025, in a post on X, Langford declared that if elected, he would work with Trump to bring the hammer down on protesters, advocating for police use of live ammunition. This, of course, aligns with Trump's hardline law and order rhetoric and signals Langford's embrace of MAGA's combative style. Social media posts have also described Langford as a, quote, Nick Fuentes acolyte, end quote, referring to the far-right white nationalist commentator known for inflammatory rhetoric. Langford's alignment with Trump and MAGA suggests a comfort with the movement's radical fringes. His campaign mirrors Trump's strategy of using provocation to gain attention, as seen in his betting on his own election victory through Kalshi, a prediction market platform which allows for betting on a wide variety of events. In May of 2025, Langford placed bets on himself, potentially yielding a payoff if he wins. Now, this move, while technically legal, sparked an ethics debate, with critics arguing it risks manipulating public perception. This tactic underscores his reliance on social media and grassroots enthusiasm rather than traditional GOP infrastructure, which, at this point, does view him as a long shot. But it's Langford's social media presence that has drawn the most scrutiny, and for good reason. His posts reveal a pattern of provocation that's culminated in the Auschwitz controversy. Langford's campaign is defined by a series of inflammatory statements that have shocked even seasoned political observers. Let's walk through the most egregious, building up to the Auschwitz post that has rightly horrified the nation. In April of 2025, during an appearance on The Lily Show, Langford proposed forcing undocumented women to marry American incels within 1 year to avoid deportation. He claimed this would, quote, foster healthy, stable young families, end quote. But the backlash was immediate. Jewish organizations, immigrant advocates, and even some Republicans condemned the proposal as misogynistic and dehumanizing. The Anti-Defamation League called it grotesque, while the California Assemblyman David Bloom said it showed a shocking lack of basic human decency. Langford didn't retreat. He fundraised off the controversy, dismissing critics as the woke mob. This pattern of doubling down continued in May 2025 when he posted a video claiming that as a German ethnic, he overcame his shame about Nazi atrocities by concluding that, quote, what the Nazis did was cool and awesome, end quote. Reported by People 4, this statement was a chilling precursor to his later actions, revealing a disturbing fascination with extremist ideologies. Then, on July 26, 2025, came the Auschwitz post. Langford shared a photograph image of himself standing before the Auschwitz concentration camp's main gate with the caption, quote, my 0% unemployment plan, end quote. The implication was unmistakable, a vile suggestion that mass extermination could, quote, solve unemployment and homelessness. The Auschwitz Memorial Museum condemned the post as a profound moral failure, stating, Auschwitz is not a prop. Your post is an affront to the dignity of the victims and a disturbing display of insensitivity and disregard for the horrifying human history. Langford's response was defiant. He thanked the museum for the shout-out and claimed his German ancestors smile upon me from above. He further referenced, "Weimar issues require Weimar solutions," a phrase tied to far-right extremism and Nazi-era rhetoric. These statements weren't mere provocations, they were deliberate embraces of hate, designed to shock and rally a specific audience. Of course, social media erupted. Reddit threads labeled him a fascist ghoul and a modern-day Nazi, with users noting his rhetoric echoes the eugenics and racism of early 20th century extremists. Perhaps the most concerning is that the California Republican Party has not condemned or even commented on Langford's rhetoric, but calls are growing for them to denounce Langford's campaign. Yet he continues to fundraise, telling supporters that the woke mob can't silence the truth. This is not hyperbole. This is a candidate for governor openly invoking the Holocaust for political gain. It forces us to confront a painful question. How did we arrive at this moment? This campaign by Kyle Langford is a symptom of a deeper malaise in American politics. The normalization of extreme rhetoric, amplified by social media and emboldened by Donald Trump's success, has created a space where candidates like Langford can gain traction even if their chances of victory are slim. His Auschwitz post is not an anomaly, but the culmination of a pattern, provoking outrage to rally a fringe base while exploiting real grievances like California's homelessness crisis, high housing costs, and economic challenges. These issues are real. California faces a housing shortage that drives up costs, with median home prices exceeding $800,000 in many areas. Homelessness affects over 180,000 people statewide, and crime rates in cities like San Francisco have fueled public frustration. Langford's solutions? Forced labor, mass deportation, extermination references are not just impractical, they are morally reprehensible. They exploit fear and division, offering simplistic answers to complex problems. The Auschwitz post is a warning. It reminds us that words have power, and when they invoke humanity's darkest moments, they cannot be dismissed as edgy or ironic. The Holocaust was not a work camp, it was a genocide that claimed 6 million Jewish lives and millions more. To use it as a political prop is to desecrate the memory of the victims and embolden those who seek to repeat history's atrocities. Langford's embrace of MAGA and his unapologetic extremism reflect a troubling shift within the Republican Party, where the boundaries of acceptable discourse are increasingly blurred. His rhetoric, openly invoking Nazi imagery and policies, exposes a growing tolerance for fringe ideologies within the GOP, particularly among its younger, social media savvy candidates. The party's silence on Langford's Auschwitz post, coupled with its failure to distance itself from other controversial figures, suggests a strategic calculation, either an unwillingness to alienate the far-right base that fueled Trump's 2024 victory, or a deeper normalization of hate-driven politics. While Langford remains a marginal figure, his ability to gain traction underscores how the GOP's center of gravity has moved towards populism and provocation, raising urgent questions about its future direction and its moral compass. This moment demands reflection. Langford's rise reflects a broader erosion of norms, where hate speech is cloaked as free speech, and provocation is mistaken for leadership. It's a test of our values as a society. Will we allow this rhetoric to fester, or will we confront it head on? So, what now? Kyle Langford's campaign may be a long shot, but his rhetoric is a symptom of a deeper crisis. As citizens, we have the power and the responsibility to act. And here's how. First of all, educate yourself. The 2026 California gubernatorial race is already crowded, with many vying for the top spot. Learn their platforms, compare their visions, and hold them accountable. Knowledge is your first line of defense. Second, speak out. Share this story with your community on social media, at the dinner table, in your workplace. Condemn Langford's actions and demand that the California Republican Party distance itself from his campaign. Silence is complicity. Third, for those of you in California, vote. Mark your calendars for June 2nd, 2026 for the primary and November 3rd, 2026 for the general election. Your vote is your voice. In a state where Democrats hold a commanding lead, every ballot counts to ensure candidates like Langford are relegated to the fringes. For those outside of California, pay attention to who may be running for powerful offices in your state, both in the next election and future elections. Never underestimate someone like Langford, for whom even a loss takes us one step further in a direction we should not be headed. Finally, support organizations fighting anti-Semitism and extremism. The Anti-Defamation League, Southern Poverty Law Center, and the Auschwitz Memorial Museum are doing critical work to combat hate. Donate, volunteer, or amplify their efforts. We stand at a crossroads. Kyle Langford's Auschwitz post is not just a scandal, it's a call to action. It's a reminder that democracy is fragile and hate, when left unchecked, can spread like wildfire. Let's use this moment to recommit to an America that values dignity, compassion, and justice for all, not to mention integrity in its leadership. All right, that brings this episode of Your Neighbor on the Left to a close. As always, I would like to thank anyone who's taken the time to download and listen to this episode. I would love to hear from you, whether it's complaints or compliments or questions or suggestions, whatever it is. Reach out to the podcast. You can use any one of the social media platforms that the podcast has. They are all listed on the Linktree page, and the Linktree page is the link for that is on the episode description. You can also contact via email at neighborotleftpodcast@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you, regardless of what it is that you have to say. Keep your eyes open on Friday of this week for another installment of Back Porch Files, the shorter supplemental episodes that we do on Fridays. And then, of course, we'll be back next week with another full episode. So until then, stay alert, stay kind, stay engaged, and as always, have the week you voted for.